From crease to crease and corner to corner, Bettor Hockey Now is NHL fantasy and betting done better. Step into the dot for Bettor Hockey Now on the Bettor Sports Network.
Welcome into episode number 7 of Bettor Hockey Now here on the Bettor Sports Network. I'm Adam Bernard, and with me, as always, is my defensive partner for today, Mr. Christopher Morais. Chris, how are we doing today?
Surviving another day without hockey. That's all we're doing here.
And we're starting to get to all right, so we had free agency last week, which is going to be this whole episode pretty much. But then that's it starts to get dry after that. Once we get, there's still a few guys out there that need to sign. But then, once you get through into mid-July, late July, there's really nothing till camps open up in September. It's going to get real dry real quick.
I had a lot of fun just listening to teams go into development camp and just trying to get a sniff of anything just to keep busy.
And of course, Mr. Anthony Rivera not with us today. He was unable to join. I believe the story is that he is getting a custom Timo Meier jersey, but tailored. And the only time the tailor had to take the measurements so it fit him perfectly was during the show. So priorities, which I get. If I had just signed Timo Meier, I'd be getting a nice Timo Meier. Let's be real. So the Devils traded for him at the deadline and then assigned him to an 8-year deal. We talked about that last time here on BSN. Like I said, today is going to be all free agency talk, and we'll start things off with a few guys that are still out there right now. Those would probably be your top 3 free agents, Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, and Matt Dumba. We don't include Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci on the list because David Krejci already said he'd likely retire if the Bruins don't re-sign him. And I know that hasn't been the same case for Bergeron, but man, I cannot see Patrice Bergeron wearing any other jersey, and I don't know if he would go anywhere else. What do you think?
No, I don't see not at this stage in his career. I think for Bergeron, it's one of two ways. Either he returns on whatever terms that he wants and plays out another year if he thinks his Boston team can still be competitive. If not, he can go home. He has cleaned up everything that there is to win at this point. So he's playing on house money at this point. If he wants to be there, great. If he doesn't, he doesn't have to. And it's the same thing for Krejci, right? He came back to the Bruins. If he doesn't want to be there, he can just scroll back over to the check and just hang out there and enjoy life. So I see it the same thing, right? If they don't sign in Boston, they move on, which I think would be a pretty big loss for Boston. If maybe less Krejci, but if Bergeron is like, hey, I'm done, that would be a loss.
I still think they're a team that hangs around the playoff mix even without those guys based on some of the signings they made. We'll get into them later. But I mean, even from off the ice, and Bergeron is not the player he was, but he's still a very good center. And not having that guy in your lineup, both from a locker room standpoint and in your lineup, it would have an effect on them. Now, Vladimir Tarasenko still sitting out there. He switched agents over the course of the last week. Not something you generally want to do at the beginning of free agency once the period has begun. Obviously, something sparked him to do that. What I've heard is that he wanted to stay with the Rangers, but realistically, their cap just wouldn't allow for it. So, there was reports that he had signed with Carolina. That kind of got pulled back. If you look at the odds for Tarasenko right now, plus 250 to Carolina, plus 300 to Florida, plus 400 to Colorado, and plus 600 to Dallas. So what do you make of Tarasenko here? Do you think it's still going to be Carolina, where it's one of these deals where it's reported, didn't happen, and now they get it done? Or are we looking somewhere else for Vladdy?
I mean, I could see him going to Carolina. Carolina could use a little bit of offensive help. Max Pacioretty has sailed his ship, so they could kind of replace him with a Tarasenko who is healthy, who can still develop. A lot of talk has been about him maybe going to Ottawa, depending on what they do with Alex DeBrincat. If he's not going to sign, then ship him out, bring in Tarasenko on a cheaper deal, and make it happen. I still think he might go to a more competitive team out west. So I would think Colorado and Dallas could definitely add. Tarasenko is a good player when he's healthy. This is a player who can contribute. For fun, I would like to see him go and play in Edmonton, but I don't think that's going to happen in any way, shape, or form, because it'd be nice to watch him play on a wing with McDavid and Draisaitl, or in any fashion play with those two. So I don't know. I'm still undecided as to where he goes, but I think he wants to pick a team that can contend. I think he is, even though he has one Stanley Cup ring under his belt, I'm sure he wouldn't mind adding a second one. So I'm not really worried about him still being unsigned, but definitely switching agents the busy period of time is not something that's great.
Not ideal for sure. And another guy that's out there, Patrick Kane. I mean, to me personally, I don't think Kane's getting signed until Tarasenko signs. I think Kane is a consolation prize for whoever doesn't get Vladdy at this point. Just to throw some odds out there, plus 300 to Carolina for Kane, plus 400 to Colorado, 600 to Dallas, 750 to Pittsburgh. We'll talk about Pittsburgh later, but if they get Kane, it's over. Just give him the freaking cup right now. But we'll talk about that later. I again, like I said, I think it'll be a consolation prize for Tarasenko. I don't think we see him sign anywhere till that happens, but just in terms of places he would be an interesting fit. I mean, Colorado for sure. I think he would have the biggest impact in Dallas. Even with the hip surgery, I think when he does come back, there'll still be some lead left in the pencil. But I think at this point he's going to be more of a middle six player than somebody you can pencil into your top six every night and count on him on the right side.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, he is a shell of what he previously was. His offensive upside, I think people still try to cling to what he was. I think that ship is slowly sailing as well. He is a defensive liability on the ice, so you can't really play him against the other team's top best players. He's a guy who's probably going to log 15 minutes of ice time if you're lucky. Maybe of those 15, 4 minutes of it comes on the power play, depending on how many you get. But it wouldn't shock me, as I said last time, if he goes unsigned or, has to wait until all these teams kind of figure out their cap situation. Maybe once they start putting players on IR, then they can, free up extra money if they need. It wouldn't shock me like if he just kind of has to wait it out. No team is really rushing to put pen to paper on that deal, especially knowing that he's coming back from hip surgery. So I could see him going a while here and nothing really moving.
A couple other guys out there that we should mention too. Jonathan Taves, his former Blackhawks teammate and shotgun partner there. Paul Stastny, two guys that are at this point, are probably third, fourth line centers they'll get signed at some point. But Matt Dumba being out there, he was considered the second best defenseman out there, probably available. And we saw what Dmitry Orlov got with Carolina, which was a little bit of a surprise there, getting 2 years, $15.5 million. I got to think that's what's holding the Dumba sign up, because if Orlov signed for that, he's probably going to want something similar, and I don't know if Dumba's really worth that.
I'm not giving him that money. I wouldn't have given Orlov that money, let alone, thinking about Dumba. So he may have to ride this out a little bit longer or, bet on himself, take a 1-year deal somewhere in a good situation where he can produce and cash in next season when the cap goes up a little bit more.
So there you go. There's some of the free agents there. I mean, again, with Dumba, it's tough to say where he's going to go just because, at this point with the market being what it is and Orlov, kind of ruining that. We'll get to Carolina in a minute. The top prize in free agency this year, we'll start going through some of the guys now that did sign. Ryan O'Reilly gets 4 years and $18 million. That's a $4.5 million cap hit with the Predators. A couple other guys they signed as well: Gustav Nyquist, Cody Glass, and Luke Shen. So you had said something in the group chat with me and Anthony about when they signed O'Reilly. It's like they basically moved Duchesne to get 4 years of O'Reilly. Didn't really make a ton of sense to you at that point.
No, that's a lateral move at that point at best. I think it was more of a culture change here for the Nashville Predators, right? They let some guys go, right? And then they brought in some different character players, right? So everywhere Ryan O'Reilly goes, we know what he can do defensively. We know that he can still have some offensive pop in his game, but he is more of a two-way player who's probably going to have to focus on defense a little bit more. The Predators aren't really a high-scoring team to start with. So I just thought this was like you're buying out a player and then you're burying all that money that you have to carry just to give it to Ryan O'Reilly. Like, okay, fine. But is that a significant upgrade from Duchesne? No. So I would think then that it is something to do with character, something to do with leadership, all those fun words on the bingo cards that coaches love. So we'll see how it goes. I think they also Luke Shen earned his money because a lot of people like the game that he's played. We know what he brings. player who can block a ton of shots and everything, but you already have a player who does that. His name is Ryan McDonough. So again, it's one of those things where I think the Nashville Predators are not necessarily going towards a rebuild. They're kind of just going to stick around, but none of those deals really excite me at all.
That's the what you just said right there. The Predators are going to stick around. That's exactly what they look like on there. Because, like, sure, Ryan O'Reilly, Forsberg, Nyquist, if you keep those three together, it's a decent top line. But the cupboard starts to get pretty bare after that in terms of forwards. Defensively, they're okay. UC Saros, good goaltender. But, you know, what like you said, they're not rebuilding, but they're not really going for it. So, like, it's almost like they're trying to go back to the old days of Barry Trotz and trying to get chicken get chicken salad out of chicken shit. And pardon my French. But again, it's just I don't know what they're doing there. And like you said, it's kind of a lateral move. And in that division, Colorado's going to compete. Chicago and Arizona are going to be bad. St. Louis, better than bad, but not great. Dallas is going to be right there towards the top. Winnipeg is probably in the middle of the pack. So maybe they feel like they can steal a wild card spot because both of those divisions out west are a little more top heavy, but I don't know. It was, they didn't really do much. And plus this was, I believe, David Poyle's last time as a GM for the Predators. So he goes out like that. And we'll see how he set the table for them for the coming season. Now, O'Reilly was traded to Toronto at the deadline. They are one of the busier teams here at free agency, so much so that they are now, along with the Carolina Hurricanes, the odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup at plus 900 for each of them. And if you look at the Eastern Conference, they're both plus 550. So Toronto has Max Domi at 1 year, $3 million, Tyler Bertuzzi 1 year, $5.5 million, John Klingberg at 1 year, $4.15 million, and Ryan Reeves 3 years, $4.05 million. Which of those do you want to start with first?
I guess I'll start with the good because then Leafs Nation is going to get at me here. Tyler Bertuzzi, I think, is a good ad. He's a that, I guess, sandpaper kind of guy that you want to add. He basically can replace Michael Bunting, who I think got a lot of love for maybe the skill set that's not there. Bertuzzi came over to the Bruins and in the playoffs, just like he took off, and he fit in there. And now he goes to a team that has a ton of skill. The Leafs have space for him in the top six, so it's up to him to stay there. And you can move him up and down the lineup real easy. You know what you're going to get from him. Hard nose, goes to the net, gets his shots. He can get his points. He's a good player. And I think that deal at 5.5 is absolutely fair for him. That I have no problem with. I do find it quite mind-boggling that their odds to win the Stanley Cup got better after adding Max Domi, John Klingberg, and Ryan Reeves. I want somebody in life to love me as much as Brad Treliving loves that deal that he gave Ryan O'Reilly. Like, it's a 3-year deal for a guy who, I mean, there's no offense to his game. He barely plays. We know what he's bringing. He's leadership in the room, if you want to call it. But I mean, I can't commit to my cell phone plan for 3 years. And now you got to commit to Ryan Reeves for 3. Okay. And then Max Domi's kind of, just there. Good feel good story. He goes home to where his dad plays. He's got offense to his game. Sure, he can do something. And then Toronto says, hey, we lost a whole bunch of great defensemen, guys who were good, who could help them get to wherever they need to be, with the exception of Justin Holl. And then they said, well, how can we improve our defensive game? Let's just sign John Klingberg. That'll make sense. So I'm excited to see John Klingberg and Morgan Rielly defensively on the ice on the same pairing when that mistake happens.
I mean, John Klingberg may be a defenseman as his title, and yes, he plays on the back end, but he's, at this point in his career, he's probably the point man on your second power play unit. You give him maybe 15 to 17 minutes a night, offensive zone heavy draws, and that's about it. Like you said, it's going to be when that first time him and Rielly end up out there together. I mean, even the Columbuses of the world are going to be licking their chops going like, all right, let's go. And the one thing I will say is that the Domi, Bertuzzi, and Klingberg deals, they're all 1-year deals. It's all prove-it deals. So, like, in terms of affecting the cap long-term, not an issue. The Reeves signing, it's a $1.35 million cap hit. And I get the importance of having a guy like that, both in the locker room and then somebody out on the ice to make you think twice about going after guys like Matthews and Marner in the corner, and he certainly does that. The thing that I don't mind any of this. I just don't get how they're now the odds-on favorite or one of the odds-on favorites to win the cup in the conference. Based on everything we know about Toronto, their inability to go deep in the playoffs, their inability to be clutch, and they didn't really address anything that the signings they made is not really going to help them in any of the departments that they need help in. Maybe
if anything, they've gotten worse. I know these are one-year deals because they need money to sign Nylander. They need money to sign Austin Matthews. So you can't start tying up a ton of money in players if you know that, hey, these, like, if they do well, great, they can go out and get a bigger payday in their next contract. Fine. And for Ryan Reeves, I mean, you had Wayne Simmons, who is basically the same, and you didn't play him. You didn't want him around. Like, I'm not going to, like, yes, maybe Ryan Reeves is a tougher customer if you actually want to fight somebody, but nobody's going to want to fight Ryan Reeves. And you had that player in your system anyway. So I just thought it was again, I mean, Brad Treliving, if that's what he wants to do, if I was Ryan Reeves and someone gave me 3 years, $4 million, I would have already, like, I would have had my suitcase packed 10 minutes later and been like, I'm already on a flight. I'll pay for it. Don't worry.
Booking my flight on the way to the airport right now.
Yeah.
So Toronto becomes the odds-on favorite there. And then the other team we talked about being the odds-on favorite out of the East and for the conference as well as the Carolina Hurricanes. They keep Freddie Anderson around, 2 years, $6.8 million. That's a 3.4 cap hit. Nothing wrong with that. Solidifies the crease. They also keep Antti Raanta around, so we know what their goaltending situation is going to be next year. That doesn't change. They signed Michael Bunting from the Maple Leafs, 3 years, $13.5 million at a 4.5 cap hit. Also, they keep Jesper Fast and Jordan Stahl. But that Dmitry Orlov signing, their blue line was one of their strengths. If this is a team if there was a team that needed help on the blue line, I can see overpaying for a guy like Orlov. Like, hey, we need to improve. You do what you need to do. But Slavin, Burns, Pesci, Shea, like, why are you allocating that much money to that?
They're fine there. And then, I mean, that is a lot of money for Dmitry Orlov. I mean, I know when he showed up to Boston, he became Bobby Orr for 15 minutes, but he turned that 15 minutes into $15.5 million for 2 years. That is bold. I think the Freddie Anderson deal is fine. I mean, you want to keep Antti Raanta around, cool. At some point, both guys are going to get hurt, so you'll have to turn to your farm system anyways. Nothing wrong with keeping Jordan Stahl, Jesper Fast. Those are okay deals, but that Dmitry Orlov deal for 2 years, like, it better work out next year, or then you'll have to, you can't trade him anywhere else unless you're retaining enough money to do it, and probably shipping a pick to any team that is not Arizona, because they've hit the limit on the amount of dead contracts they can carry. So now you got to find somebody else who wants to do their job. But Carolina is definitely invested in the back end of their ice, when in reality in the playoffs, where they really struggled, again, they had injuries, but they struggled to score goals. So.
And you look at they have about $2.8 million at cap space. So if they are going to bring in Tarasenko, somebody else has to go. So I don't know what happens there, but they have one of the better blue lines in the league. That's not a spot where I'm going to be spending $7 million a year to upgrade something that doesn't need to be upgraded. I can't see him playing any. Maybe he's going to be on the penalty kill unit, but I don't see him really playing any power play time unless somebody gets hurt. So it's like you spend all that money for what is a third pairing defenseman. Now Bunting, on the other hand, I feel like he fits the mold of that lineup to a degree. That's he is what Carolina does. He's a Rod Brindamore kind of player. That signing I like. It kind of fills a need for him. Is their identity, but they still need to do something else here. Carolina, they're still a move away from really separating themselves, especially with what Jersey has done. You got to expect the Rangers to hopefully be better with Laviolette. Pittsburgh's better, and we know how tough that Atlantic is now with Toronto. Boston, we'll see what happens. Florida defending conference champions, et cetera, et cetera.
I'll give them a pass just because, like I said, they dealt with a lot of injuries, and when you lose key parts of your offense, I mean, there's only so much you can do, right? Like when you lose Svechnikov, you lose Pacioretty, and you walk into the playoffs and you're missing guys. Fine, I'll give them a pass there, and I'll say, okay, let me see what you do. Again, barring any injuries, if you have a healthy team, you've added Michael Bunting. Maybe they wait to the deadline to add some pieces. The 7th, 8th defenseman, a couple bottom 6 guys just to fill out the lineup and whatnot. But they need to stay healthy, and they need to get maximum value from these guys that they signed.
Staying in the Metropolitan Division, we're going to talk about my Rangers. We're not very busy, but they made one signing I really liked and one signing that scratched my head a little bit. So they get Blake Wheeler on a 1-year, $800,000 deal. I got no problem with that. They need help in their top six on the right side. It's a 1-year prove it deal. I think he will fit in nicely there. Whether they put him, on the same line with Aaron or, whoever's going to center him with Mika or whatever. Bottom line is they addressed the need. They addressed it cheap. Jonathan Quick, 1 year, $825,000. Not a terrible signing for what a backup goalie is going to be, but he wasn't good enough to stay with the Kings, who had Phoenix Copley and then had to trade for Joonas Korpisalo at the deadline and then had Cal Peterson. He goes to Vegas, where in front of him is guys that you would think he would still be able to outperform and maybe be a backup. Couldn't do that in Vegas. Couldn't even crack the lineup. So I don't know what they expect Quick to provide the Rangers. Yes, Igor Shesterkin's going to play 60 to 65 games for sure, and that only leaves about 15 to 20 games left at that point. Can you trust Quick for that? I mean, does the Rangers goaltending coach, does he see something in Quick's game where it's like, okay, maybe I fix this little hitch or this little thing, and he'll be serviceable for another season? That one really scratched my head with Quick.
Yeah, that's like you said, that kind of forces Igor Shesterkin to play maybe more games than you want him to play. So we know a lot of teams like this 1A, 1B kind of goalie thing, 60-40 split, which is those guys, especially for Quick. It's just not, I don't know. I will take nothing away from the Blake Wheeler deal, though. That is wonderful. I can't believe Blake Wheeler is going to go play in the Rangers top six for $800K and Toronto signed Ryan Reeves at 1.35. The need is just completely different, but excellent value there. Whatever he brings to the team, he can still move the puck. I mean, his skating is not there. That's fine. He's a little bit older. He's not going to be counted on to produce. Just kind of, show up and contribute or help, Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere and just bounce around wherever you need to be in the top 9. That's it. I'm perfectly fine with that.
And the other couple of minor signings there, they got Riley Nash 2 years for 1.5. Nick Bonino also 1 year, 800,000. Eric Gustafson on the back end, 1 year, 825,000. That's a depth move on the blue line. But with Nash and Bonino, I kind of like the strategy of, okay, we're not going to, we know we need help on the back end. There's really nobody out there we're willing to pay. So let's at least get a couple of defensive forward guys to help fill out the bottom of the lineup and try to compensate for the fact that your blue line really doesn't have a strong defensive presence. So Chris Drury doing, I think, everything he can right now. And I think he's banking on the fact that the Rangers will bounce back and play a little bit more like they did 2022 than they did in 2023. And hopefully that Wheeler signing pans out. Now we head back to the Atlantic Division here. Let's talk a little Ottawa. Travis Hamonic, 2 years, $2.2 million, still a solid depth defenseman at this point. Joonas Korpisalo, 5 years, $20 million. I know Anthony was not thrilled with that signing for Ottawa. I don't mind it as much. I think he's going to be their 1A for now, and then at some point we'll transition into the 1B when they find a better 1A, and they've got a few years to do that now. And once he got out, he played well for the Kings, and he wasn't terrible for Columbus. He just had no help in front of him for that last year and a half.
Yeah, the Travis Hamonic part is fine, small deal, whatever. He comes in, he can mentor kids, keep them busy and whatnot. Yes. But Joonas Korpisalo is a good goalie. We forget that he had to play in Columbus. And then he went to LA and he basically, like when he showed up, it was kind of like a 50-50 split with Copley and they kind of just rolled one after another. And then Korpisalo just took over and he was the guy. And he played like LA was a good puck managing team. Like they were top 5 in shots per game. So they, Korpisalo didn't have to face a ton, but he had to work to get to where he was. And he also had to face, one of the hottest teams in the first round. So there's a lot of, I don't mind this deal. I think the term though is a little bit long there on 5 years because you're basically saying, okay, well, I have the player that I want. And the question is that at some point, he's not the goalie of the future, right? And it's not Anton Forsberg either, but they have guys in the system who can come up. Mads Sogard is there. That's the guy who they think is going to be the next one. Well, he's got 1 year left on his RFA deal. So it basically prices him out. Now you have to keep him in the minors. You got to give him a smaller deal. And it just doesn't help that development. If you thought Sogard was the guy, then you basically gave Korpisalo too much term. I'm not a problem with the money. The money is fine. I think he's earned his $4 million cap hit, which is nothing wrong with me. But that 5-year term means that you can't really trade him. And if that's your backup goalie, that's a lot of money for a guy who's going to sit on the bench, even if he plays, let's say, 40% of the games.
Now, the other thing we're waiting on with Ottawa is Alex DeBrincat's on the market. The Islanders are the team I keep hearing, and the pace of any deal happening there does not seem to be happening as quick as anybody would like. But just to kind of talk with, the trend of what the NHL is going now with goaltending, it almost seems to me like the new norm is going to be that 1A, 1B, and it's kind of trended that way over the past few years. Unless you have a guy like Ilya Sorokin or an Igor Shesterkin, where it's just a bona fide, no doubt about it, number one goalie, it almost seems like you look at what the Kings did last year. They had success with that. Vegas won the Stanley Cup with that. So I almost think like you're going to start to see a devaluing of the goalie position over the next few years. Not that it's not important, but teams are proving that, hey, as long as you play well in front of them, you can have a better than average goaltender behind you, and you're going to be okay.
Even if you don't have a great goalie, look at Colorado. I mean, Darcy Kemper was not good when they won the Stanley Cup, and they still, he's still got a ring. So I think for some teams, yes, they can get away with having a mediocre goalie at best. But at one point, you have to make a choice, right? And I still look at Florida. They made it with yes, Bobrovsky didn't start, but when he took over, he was, and they've always wanted him to be the guy. He just hasn't done it. But there was no question at any point, even when Bob didn't play well, on who was going to start the next game. It was always Bobrovsky. And it's the same thing. A lot of these teams, when you have those goalies, it simplifies a lot of things. We think, the Connor Hellebucks of the world, you mentioned the Shesterkins, the Andre Vasilevskis. These guys, to me, are still very important, and they can make your defense or make your team better. So yes, you can go out and invest all that kind of money on the offensive core and the defensive core and get them to play well and all that jazz. But I still think goaltending is important. And some of these teams are going to look at this recent run of teams winning with mediocre goaltending and going, oh, maybe we can cut a corner here. And that's going to flop because the Edmonton Oilers are really good, example of it not working. Toronto's an even better example of it not working. So some of these teams need elite goaltenders to succeed. And I still believe that you need a guy who plays 70% of the game. I feel like coaches are now we're just bubble wrapping goalies because we don't want them to hurt themselves. Kind of like pitchers now never pitch over, 100 pitches because you don't want to blow out their elbow.
Could definitely see that trend coming for sure. Now, the reigning Vezina winner, speaking of goaltenders, Linus Ullmark. Let's talk a little Bruins here. They signed Morgan Geekie after the Seattle Kraken let him go. Milan Lucic coming back home. That's a feel-good signing there at the bottom. I think they're trying to, what they got with Hampus Lindholm last year, they're trying to recreate that again with the Shattenkirk signing to a degree. And then JVR, will probably be down on that third, second, middle six, we'll say. And I think he'll be all right there. I don't have a problem with what Boston did here. I think they're just trying to, run it back again. Obviously not going to set a record for wins like they did this year, but they still have a very competitive window, even if Bergeron does not come back, even if Krejci doesn't come back. And I like what they did here. I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, their team, they're a good team, so they made very few changes to what was needed. I don't think they got specifically worse. I mean, the loss of Taylor Hall, sure. Maybe the loss of Foligno, okay. But you've replaced them. To me, JVR is a cheaper version of Taylor Hall, and then Lucic a cheaper version of Foligno. So, maybe you can get away with it with the rest of those guys. Shattenkirk's just there, to exist. And maybe, like you said, hope that you get a Lindholm effect out of it. Right. They added Dmitry Orlov at the deadline, so it's not like he made this team exceptionally better. So the loss of him, I don't think, is as big. Yes, it hurts, but I do still think that I'm looking at this team still with Krejci and Bergeron in it. And if that doesn't happen, then it's definitely it's a different team. The loss, just what Bergeron does every night when he's on the ice, the winning of the faceoffs, the defense, the offense, everything. He's not going to score, 30 goals, rack up 40, 40 assists, 70 points, but he is still too important to this team right now. Because if you look at that center core without Krejci and Bergeron, it starts to become pretty thin pretty quick.
Team that beat the Bruins in the playoffs this year, the Florida Panthers, also were a little busy over the last week. They bring in Oliver Ekman-Larsson on a 1-year, $2.25 million deal to shore up that back end. Also, they signed Nico Mikkola, who the Rangers acquired at the deadline along with Tarasenko. Played well for them. That was the one thing the Rangers did, right in addressing it. 3 years, $7.5 million. They also get Dmitry Kulikov on a 1-year, $1 million deal. That's basically a cheaper version of Radko Gudas and less likely to take a penalty than him. But Evan Rodrigues, 4 years, $12 million. That was a signing I know Anthony was a big fan of. He's kind of a Swiss Army knife that could play anywhere in the lineup, up and down, forward. And just he brings whatever that line needs, he brings it. So that was something Florida needed in the playoffs, and it was a need that they had to address, and they went out and did it. So right now, the way Florida looks, I mean, I think they still need a little more offensive punch, but they made the moves they need to make. That blue line is almost completely different now.
Yeah, I think taking the risk on Oliver Ekman-Larsson is great. I think the price of it as well. I mean, he's still going to collect a ton of money from Vancouver, so that's fine. He gets to go there and kind of, see what he can do. We know his defensive game is what it is, but this was a player who could contribute offensively, and he played in Arizona for a while where there was nothing going around him. So I think maybe if you give him a little bit more freeway, a little bit more lane, there's less guys in front of him that are really taking his spot. Right? Like maybe, look at Aaron Ekblad. He's going to have to go through surgery. Brandon Montour as well. Same thing. He's got to go through surgery. So shoring up with Oliver Ekman-Larsson's fine. He can play 20, 25 minutes if you give him the opportunity. Multiple times when, Hughes was injured, Quinn Hughes was injured in Vancouver, he would step up and he would deliver. So I think that's, low risk, high reward kind of play. Mikkola, the same thing. Dmitry Kulikov, those are just guys who kind of, pad the bottom of your defense. Again, you lose Radko Gudas, fine, you can mix and match these guys. And like you said, less likely to take a dumb penalty at some point. And Evan Rodrigues, exactly. He is, I don't know how Colorado, I mean, maybe they couldn't afford $3 million for him, but I feel like everywhere he goes, he plays well, but he always ends up somewhere else. Like he was good in Pittsburgh, and then he was in Colorado. He was good there, and now he's in Florida, and I expect him to be good. He is, to me, he can do a lot of different things. He can score, he can move the puck up the ice, he can facilitate it, he can do a lot of great things, and it's exactly what Florida needs. He is a better version to me than what Anthony Duclair was. So I think maybe, moving one out to be able to get Rodrigues, I think that's a plus.
I mean, you look at Rodrigues, he started with Buffalo, played with Pittsburgh, and then played with Colorado. And he, like we said, he everywhere he goes, he makes an impact on the lineup. So, Florida's kind of tied up cap space wise, so they might have to make some sort of move if they're going to bring anybody else in. But they've done a good job with what they've had to do in terms of addressing needs and having a limited budget to do it. And of course, Kachuk's still the straw that stirs the drink there. Now, lastly, and I promise we'll skip the Penguins the next time because we've been talking to them about it a lot. But understand this: I don't like to be on the Penguins bandwagon. I mean, like as a Ranger fan, like you grow up, you're supposed to hate the Islanders and the Devils, the Flyers and the Penguins. Devils, yes, I grew up, during the Brodeur era. Islanders, yes, I don't like them, but they've never been competitive at the same time in the Rangers and vice versa. So yes, I understand that rivalry is bitter and all that. To me, it's the Penguins. That's the one that really just. That being said, Tristan Jarry kept around at 5 years, 26, almost $27 million. Ryan Graves, 6 year, $27 million. I love that deal for them. $4.5 million cap hit for that, for what he brings. Lars Eller, 2 years, $4.9 million. Definitely strong guy to have in the middle, down, as a second or third line center. Noel Acciari is going to give you some defensive help on the back end. Matt Nieto, another one of those, wingers that kind of just does a little bit of everything, nothing flashy, but contributes. 2 years, $1.8 million for him. Acciari was 3 years, $6 million. When you look at what the Penguins lineup right now, it's, I'm not going to say it's scary. I mean, there's a lot of older guys on this roster, but they really are building a team that's going to be a tough out night in and night out.
It's always a question of health for the Penguins, right? Like how healthy is Crosby going to be? How healthy is Malkin going to be? How many times is Chris Letang going to get hurt? So it's more of that. I think keeping Tristan Jarry was important. I also like that they went out and they got Alex Nedeljkovic because, I mean, Casey DeSmith was not was not good. And if I'm gonna bet on somebody, I mean, bet on maybe Nedeljkovic. He was good at one point, and then he went to Detroit, and that ended there. Ryan Graves, I think, too. The term, I'm like, that's okay. Like, I'll live with it. There are not a lot of teams that gave out massive, long-term, big money deals, right? But giving Ryan Graves the money, it definitely helps their blue line. And then the Lars Eller, the Nola Charis, the Matt Nietos, this is just filling out your bottom six. That bottom six has to be better. It's got to contribute. It's got to support. And I think guys like Nola Chari, we saw what he did in Toronto. Everybody raved about him. It's the little things that he does afterwards. When you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're not a physical team. You don't think of them as kind of banging people around. So you bring in one guy who can kind of do all of that for you. And then Lars Eller, you can slide him up and down wherever you want, 3C, 4C, depending on who gets hurt, 2C. But they need everybody to stay healthy, and they need Tristan Jarry to be exceptionally good.
Would you call them the third best team in the division? If we're going to say that Carolina, New Jersey are 1-2, pick your order. Are you ready to say Pittsburgh is ready to jockey with the Rangers for the third best spot in that division, or is it still the Rangers?
Sure. I mean, we'll disregard Columbus. We'll disregard Philadelphia. We won't give them any credit for, what they have. They're not that great. The Islanders are just like, nothing excites me about the Islanders. I look at that team and I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, it's great for Elias Sorokin. He got paid. He deserves his money. He is the backbone of that team. But when you look at the New York Islanders, you're like, okay, but like, who's going to score goals? Like, it's going to be Ilya Sorokin's going to become the modern day version of what John Gibson was back in his prime, which was basically excellent goals against average, excellent save percentage. His analytics are going to be great. And then he's going to have a terrible win-loss record because he's not going to win any games. So Sorokin's going to be that guy who's got like a 230 goals against average, a 925 save percentage. And then, oh, by the way, like, he starts the season, he's got like, I don't know, eight wins, 10 losses, and 2 overtime losses. You're like, okay, but how is this possible? So yeah, I think the Penguins can at least compete for it, but the Rangers should be the team that takes it.
And the Capitals we're not talking about either, because they're that typical, maybe they hang around the wild card picture, but not realistically in it down to the last couple of weeks, but nothing really going on in Washington either. Now, if the Islanders get the Brincat, does that change your landscape of the division at all, or is it just one offensive guy in a desert otherwise of bereft of offensive talent?
To me, it changes nothing. Even if you're adding, like, they have players there who can produce, right? But they gave Bo Horvat too much money, and then Barzal is okay. And at this point, I'm starting to look at the Brincat and going, okay, well, you seem to not want to be anywhere, and why is this the case? Like, fine, if you didn't want to be in Chicago as a young player, like, I get that it's part of a rebuild and stuff, but you didn't want to be there, so they said, okay, we'll get rid of you. And now you're in Ottawa, where he had a pretty productive season, and the Ottawa Senators look like a team that can at least compete. Like, they have good pieces there, and he can be part of the solution, and he's just doesn't want to sign a deal. I don't know if he doesn't like the downtown traffic, or that there's nothing to do in Ottawa. Maybe he's not a fan of the outlet malls, but at this point, I don't know what he wants. And if he thinks his career is going to get jump started by playing for the Islanders, a team that can barely generate any offense, okay, then you're basically going to a slightly better version of the Chicago Blackhawks. And I would argue, if I was him, I would want to be on the Chicago Blackhawks today more than I'd be on the Islanders team, because at least you're going to get to play with Bedard.
And this is not to trash the Islanders, but I'd rather be on Ottawa than the Islanders, because with the Islanders, you kind of know what they are at this point, and like, maybe they'll be a little better. They could win a playoff round if they get the right, but they're not a cup contender, and neither is Ottawa. But in 2 years, Ottawa is going to probably be a lot closer to being a cup contender than the New York Islanders are. So, and I've never been to Ottawa. I do know that the arena is like 40 minutes outside of downtown,
middle of nowhere. Yeah. If you're looking for parking at the Canadian Tire Center, no problem. They got you, because there's nothing else around there.
And do you know if they train near there, or is that at least closer to the city?
I think the Sens complex isn't too far, but I mean, it's far for no reason. It's 40 minutes out, assuming there's no traffic. But there's just nothing to do there. It's on the side of a highway, their arena. But again, lots of parking. If you're worried about having place to park, not a problem. When you go to Ottawa, lots of parking. You'll get a good show on the ice, because Brady's fun to watch, and the rest of that team's pretty fun. But I don't know what Alex DeBrincat wants at this point. He doesn't want to be on a team that likes to shoot the puck a ton, and he is a shooter who can score goals. So he would much rather go play for the Islanders and be on a team that doesn't average that many shots a game, sure.
Whatever you want.
Hey.
Couple more signings to get through here before we call it a day on episode 7 of Bettor Hockey Now. Matt Duchene, he's opened up talking Predators and talking about his departure. He's now in Dallas. He signs what is a 1-year, $3 million prove-it deal. They bring in Sam Steele out of Anaheim for 1 year, $850,000 as a depth signing there. I don't mind that. But Duchene, you know, as a third liner, I'm down with that. And I think that Dallas was a good fit for him. But again, you're definitely getting a guy that's in the back 9 of his career, probably we'll say the back 4 at this point.
Yeah. And he can, you know, he can play the wing as well. He can complement some of the other guys that are there, Joe Pavelski and the, you know, the Bens and the Sagans of the world. He can slot into a whole bunch of different places. I think the $3 million deal is good. If Dallas, let's say at whatever point, wants to add a player down the line at the trade deadline, they still have money to do so. So I think that's a very team-friendly deal. I don't know if he's going to re-sign in Dallas. If he has a good year, he might try to get a longer term, collect some money. But no, nothing wrong with there. Same thing with Sam Steele. You know, some people forget he was playing on the top line for Minnesota because they didn't have any center core. So he gets to go there. He'll slot in probably in the bottom 6 somewhere, but he's a young player, and it's, you know, you're betting on the upside, which is fun.
Anaheim Ducks bring in Alex Killorn, who there was a few teams that were in on him, but 4 years, $25 million, $6.25 million cap hit. Radko Gudas, 3 years, $12 million, just there to provide some sandpaper and edge and protect some of the young guys in the lineup. But, you know, almost any other team that would be an Anaheim situation, I wasn't sure why Killorn would sign, but the first and only time I went to an Anaheim Ducks game, I remember walking to the arena going, I could be in last place in the division and not care. Like,
yeah, that's how I felt when I went to go to Florida for the first time and watch Panthers and Habs. I was like, yeah, I can see how showing up to the arena in flip-flops and shorts, you know, doesn't matter where you are in the standings. You're having a good day. It's sunny. It's nice outside. You know, you're just having a good opportunity. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right down the road from all the Disneyland parks. So, you know, I'm sure they get some sort of cool admission with the Ducks, even though they're not owned by Disney anymore. But I was a little surprised to see a guy like Killorn, who is known as being like a playoff performer, a guy that gets you those clutch goals that, you know, you put him on the line with the top players and he does the dirty things. I just thought, like, going to Anaheim, I was like, okay. But then again, it is Anaheim. And listen, it was his chance to get paid. He's getting $6+ million a year.
He got paid. I didn't think he earned that money recently, but if you want to give him 6 and a quarter, same thing with Gudas. I think Gudas got a lot of money as well for what he provides. Those, if it's anybody else but the Ducks, I would say these are terrible contracts. Why are you locking up money in them? But it's the Anaheim Ducks. I don't think they're going to be competitive anytime soon. I assume they have to get to the cap floor, so they got to send out some money to somebody. And if you find some guys who are willing to go to Anaheim, live by the beach, sure.
Now, we took the Pacific Division. We've said before, it's Vegas, the Kings, and Edmonton. They're the top 3, however you want to order them. That 4th spot, I think, is pretty wide open. Now, it's not going to be San Jose. We know that. When you look at the rest of the division, Seattle was the 4th, you know, was up there last year. I got to see them do that again last year. You know, not to say it was a fluke, but, you know, Martin Jones and Philip Grubauer, that you know, you caught lightning in a bottle there with Martin Jones for part of the season. So they're certainly a contender. Vancouver's on the rise. Calgary, I want to say they're on the decline, but there is the Darryl Sutter factor that now he's not there, and you might have guys that are just happy to be playing not for him anymore. But do you think Anaheim thinks that maybe they have a chance at that 4 spot, or no? I don't.
If I'm Trevor Zegras showing up to the rink, I don't think I have a chance of making the playoffs. I'm going there. I'm having a good time. I got my condo by the beach. You know, I can see out into the open. I'm hanging out with my boy Troy Terry. You know, maybe Lou Carlson comes to the party this time, and we're just having a good time. And we show up to the rink, like we do our thing. Sure, they're kids; they can still be professional and whatnot, but you're not walking into their day one. Maybe you think you can make the playoffs, and then day 2 shows up. You're like, all right, fine, we're done here.
Everybody's got a chance for the playoffs in October, not so much by Thanksgiving. American Thanksgiving. So we'll stay, you know, Orange County, beautiful place. We'll head a little north, go to LA and wrap things up here. So the Kings signed Cam Talbot, 1 year, $1 million. They bring in David Riddick, 1 year, $187,500. They still got Phoenix Copley there. And then we talked at the beginning, Andrei Kopitar extension for 2 years, $14 million. Seems like they're trying to copy the Vegas Golden Knights plan at this point with the goaltending. And I don't mind it. I think Cam Talbot is fine. Riddick, Copley, whoever ends up being the backup, I'm sure they'll go back and forth, but I think they're going to be okay. And, keeping Kopitar there for another 2 years at $14 million, I've got no problems with what the Kings have done. And I think that, I'm ready to maybe place a bet on them as division champs. I don't know. I've got this feeling.
I'm not going that far. Having seen Cam Talbot in the East, he's starting to fall apart and he's hurt. And I think that's why they also brought in David Rittich, because they're like, well, this investment might not work out. So let's already protect our investment. So technically they're spending 1.875 on a goalie. That's how, and it doesn't matter which one plays. David Rittich, not that great. Cam Talbot, not that great. And now if you're going to rock Phoenix Copley, who you're like, hey, this is the guy, like he had good win-loss numbers, but when you look at those raw numbers afterwards, they were very, very ordinary. So again, he reminded me of Martin Jones, which is, good wins, good losses, and then you look at the actual numbers and you're like, what is happening? There was a lot of puck luck there for Copley. The only thing that can save the goaltending carousel or whatever there, the Kings were a team that loved to shoot the puck, and I don't think they got any worse in that department. So when you add a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, you're making sure that you're going to continue to possess the puck. You're going to continue to drive the pace. When you bring in, when you keep Kopitar around, you're not changing that philosophy overnight. You're going to continue to be a team that drives the net, takes a lot of shots, and hopefully those shots end up in the back of the net. Because this is not a team that's built from the back end out. If anything, it's built from the front end, which is kind of different for the Kings because we always thought of them as that good defensive team. But they also had to get rid of Sean Durzi, and there's some question marks there. There's more than enough question marks for me to say, you know what, I'll take a flyer with somebody else, but not on the Kings to win the division. They would have to beat the defending Stanley Cup champions in the Golden Knights, and they'd have to get past the Edmonton Oilers, who just score against anybody. Unlikely.
That third pairing does get a little weak. They're going to be relying on that the top two pairings of Doughty and Anderson and Gavrikov and Roy a lot. I understand they had to make a move there to maybe clear some space or whatever, but trading Durzi was a little bit rough. I thought he was going to be a part of that foundation in the back end. But hey, got to do what you got to do to bring in Pierre-Luc Dubois, I guess. That'll be the Kings right there. Now, before we wrap here, just want to mention you can play the real-time Sports Daily Pick'em contest. You could set a lineup of player props, hit them all, and win NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA, and more. Go to rtsports.com/BSN or rtsports.com/alarm. First-time depositors get 100% instant match up to $200 with deposit codes ALARM23 or BSN23. All one word there. And, of course, please play responsibly. If you need any help with that, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So we always like to have a little fun story to wrap here on the Bettor Hockey Now here on Bettor Sports Network. Last week we were talking hockey movies. I do have my Duck shirt on today. Anthony missed out on that. Now, that's not what we're talking about. Today I wanted to go a little sentimental. What was your first NHL game? Walk me through.
I was a kid. I don't remember much of it. I know it was a Habs game because that's all we could get to. I will say this though, my first, once I became old enough to be able to, travel and whatnot, my first game that I went to go watch that was not at the Bell Center was in Pittsburgh. This was when it, not when it was the PPG Paint Arena or whatever they call it now. But I stayed. Is that what they still call it now?
Well, it was the Igloo before that. It was
no. They had already moved to their new place. I didn't get a chance to go to the Igloo, unfortunately. I stayed in downtown Pittsburgh at the Omni. It was a great experience. I remember driving all night, and then during massive snowstorm in Canada as well, end of February. But I went down. Pittsburgh is a beautiful, beautiful city. Beautiful city. I loved it. You can walk anywhere. I had a blast. Habs ended up winning 6-5 that game. PK scored an overtime winner, if I'm not mistaken, 2013. So that was the first one that I got to go watch that was away, because that one I remember a little bit more than however old I was when I was trucking to the Bell Center.
Yeah, I mean, my first ever Stanley Cup game was actually at the Igloo. It was the second time the Penguins and the Red Wings played in the Stanley Cup Finals. It was Game 3. Sergei Gonchar scored the go-ahead goal late. I've never felt a place in my life shake the way the Igloo shaked when he scored that goal. Like, my seat was vibrating. Got to sit next to E.J. Raddick for that game. That was pretty cool, too. My first ever hockey game, though, Ranger tickets are super expensive in New York, especially, I'm born in 83. So early 90s, they win the Cup in 94. It was impossible to get a ticket. Fast forward to 1997, the only year that Gretzky and Messier overlapped on the Rangers. One night after school, late afternoon, phone rings. My uncle's like, "Hey, want to go to the game tonight?" It was Rangers Canadians, and like, what kind of question is that? Of course, I want to go. And like, it's just one of those things where you just like, I can remember driving over the Brooklyn Bridge to go, which we usually didn't take the bridge. We usually took the tunnel if we went into the city. And this was before they had the protective nets up in the back, and there was at one point an errant slap shot went right by my head and clanged off an iron bar. And even at like 13 and 14, like when Messier and Gretzky were on the ice together, I'm like, just watch this. Nothing else matters right now. Just watch these shifts, because like you're never going to see something like this again. And they lost to Montreal. It was 5-3, but I mean, it's one of those nights where I could still remember every detail about it. And it was, it was awesome. And I've gotten to travel to see the Rangers a lot, especially out west. Once my wife and I moved from New York to Northern California, before we had a kid, that was part of the deal. Like, hey, we're traveling to see the Rangers on the road every year. So I've gotten to see places like Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver. I mean, all over. Chicago, I went with buddies. I mean, there's nothing better than a hockey road trip. Let's just start with that right there. Getting in the car, and maybe even if you're lucky, like, before the NHL expanded so much out west, it was pretty much a lock that you would get San Jose, LA, and Anaheim on the same trip. And that first year I was here, it worked great. Drove down to LA for the Saturday game, played the Ducks on Sunday, hit Disneyland on Monday, and then stopped in San Jose for the game on Tuesday. That was probably my favorite of the trips. That was pretty good. But yeah, if you've got, if you're watching and listening to Bettor Hockey Now, you want to drop a comment in the chat, tell us about your first game. We love hearing about stuff like that. Fantasy stuff, but gambling stuff, wagering stuff. It's also about the memories, too. We love hearing that kind of stuff. But that'll do it for episode 7 of Bettor Hockey Now on the Bettor Sports Network. Anthony should be back with us next week. Going to have plenty more to talk about here. For my good friend north of the border, Christopher Morais, killing it today on NHL Free Agency Recap. I'm Adam Bernard. We'll be back with you soon here on Bettor Sports Network. On Bettor Hockey Now.
Bettor Hockey Now is on the Bettor Sports Network.